gonna do it.
What's up, you guys? Happy Sunday. So we're just analyzing the fact that I have a hat on that we cut. I was gonna say braided. What? I don't know what's wrong with me. We cut Braden's hair and we decided we need to cut it some more. So
yeah, the most affectionate thing I think I've ever heard from my wife is telling me I look like I have a toupee on my head.
No, I did not say that. He said it and I simply agreed. So yesterday.
Is that different? Is that different?
Yes, because yesterday I was like, we should cut the top. We should cut the top. We should cut the top. Hi, Amanda. And he's like, you're not touching the top. And I actually thought last night, kind of looks like you have a toupee. I kept my mouth shut, being a good wife. And this morning he goes, kind of looks like I have a toupee. And I was like, well, I thought that too. So drop a 1 if I'm right. Drop a 2 if he's right.
Yeah, drop a number 2.
All right, guys. So what we're going to talk about tonight. So the headline is how to get your husband to pick up his socks, fill in whatever you want, clothes, dishes, etc. And on the other side, guys, how to get your wife to stop being so negative. So obviously these are like super blanket statements, and that's part of why we put it on there, because we want to talk about actually how do you influence people that you love in a way that works better, feels better, and is probably completely opposite of what you've been trying.
Well, I think with all this, you guys, the more we can work on our communication skills that work with our partner, right? Like all these things we've been talking about all week long of understanding ourselves so we understand our partners a little bit more, and understanding that our communication skills might not be that exact way that they listen and interpret the way that you think that they should, right? Like we talked a little bit about yesterday of, things being left out and everything else, and it being not necessarily an intentional thing of like, where I think for a lot of people, where guys, I would think we probably assume the role of more of like leaving our stuff out. Obviously, Nate. And then just, our significant other tend to obviously pick it up. And I know for us, there was that sense of like, you just expect me to do this. That's why you do this, right? And it's like, well, no, it's not coming from like a conscious level of like, I'm going to leave this out and Courtney's going to magically come by and pick these things up. But I think
even though it happened,
right? but I think that's the stories we start living into, and the stories that like resentment, and it's like we've had this conversation 8 million times, right? Like I can only speak so loud before you finally understand these things. And so with what we're going to talk about tonight is, excuse me, I had almonds before we started this.
Why?
Courtney always yells at me first.
Why, you guys?
But it is understanding how do you change, yet again, we talked about state and focus running everything. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is is coming from a different angle, throwing a little bit of a curveball into the equation that might allow your partner to be a little bit more receptive to of what you're trying to put out there, as opposed to...
You should be done. As opposed to the negative side. So I'll tell the guy side or the wife side of how to get your husband to stop eating almonds before you do a live video.
That was a bad idea.
Okay, so this comes from Chloe Madonis, who works really, really closely with Tony Robbins, and so we've now both read parts of this book.
Well, and she's one of the premier family counselor, like couples counselors in the world. Like she's world renowned in like this area. She's written, I think, 10 plus books. And a lot of this comes from, she talks a lot about how these all affect the 6 human needs and everything else, but also how to kind of come from a different perspective.
Yeah. Okay. So the story goes, there were some, I think they were doctoral candidates.
Yeah.
So women, and they were like, they all had the same complaint. Like, I can't get my husband, my significant other, to stop, like, just dropping his clothes where they land. Like, there's socks in front of the couch every day. There's the underwear right in front of the shower. His shirt's on the ground, right? And, like, raise your hand, ladies. Do you feel this way? Because Brandon stacks stuff still on the edge of our bed, and then I just come by and throw it in the closet, right? Because I'm like, well, eventually he'll need it. So she said...
I read this before she did, so I was working on her... doing this.
And he actually told me the story, and I was like, heck no. Okay, so have an open mind. So the question is like, well, what do you do? Well, what do most of us do? We're like, why didn't you pick up your socks? Why can't you pick up your socks? I hate seeing your socks when I go down. This is me, right? I hate seeing your socks in the morning when I go down to meditate. I don't want to have to pick up your socks from the day before. I don't want your clothes to be at the end of our bed, like on our bed frame. So he doesn't do it. Eventually he does. And then what happens? I say it again. I try to say it louder, right? And so the whole point of this, there's a loud bang in our house. The whole point of this is that, she says, okay, well, is that working? Well, no, it's not, because it hasn't changed 10 years into
Well, I
it.
think that's the common question for anything that we
Yeah.
do is like, well, what you're doing isn't working, but you continue to do it.
Right. That's like
What's-
the definition of
what's
insanity.
the definition of that?
Yeah, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? And so, but we do that, right? We all do that. It's like, well, maybe I just speak louder, or I yell louder, or I take his clothes and throw them in the closet. Like, something's going to give. He's gonna see my side of it, right? And so in this story, it was like the wives just assumed they don't listen to me, they don't respect me. Like, it meant way more than they just took their socks off. And like Brandon said, like, he wasn't thinking that I was gonna come pick it up. It was just like, that was just a thing, and it doesn't bother him, right? And so yelling, not working. And so the answer to this was, they said, okay, we're gonna do this, we're gonna try this with our husbands, and we're not gonna tell them anything, we're gonna try this, okay? So instead of harassing them and trying to get them to pick it up and trying to get them to see their side, every time they did, so they would leave the stuff, right? And so say the husband would come down, pick up the socks, the wife would just go over and like passionately start kissing him. And then every time he picked up his clothes, every time he did something, the wife would passionately kiss him. And I know, ladies, when I heard this, I was like, no, why should I kiss you for having to do expectation? We talk about expectation, for like having to pick up your socks. But what they found is that 3 weeks later, because the guys were like, oh, look at this, like, my wife's in the mood, my wife loves me more when I do these things, they started doing it, right? And if we go back to acts of service, right, like, both of their needs were getting met, and probably their love languages. So it was super interesting. So we're gonna try this. He knows that it's gonna happen, so it's maybe not a good thing. But it's like the idea behind this, you guys.
Take out my socks real quick.
The idea behind this, you guys, is that, like, if something isn't working, sometimes you have to flip the script so far the other direction to actually see it work. But if you think about this, we were talking about this on the way up, like, we have a new puppy-ish, so she's a year or something. So we're still teaching her how to walk. She walks way better when Brandon has treats in his pocket and gives her treats for acting correctly. Same thing, positive reinforcement, than yanking on her the whole walk and trying.
My mouth always salivated when I started picking up socks. It's Pavlov's dog.
And trying to get her to stay with us, right? So if you think about it, it's the same positive reinforcement. And quite honestly, in a relationship, like, what feels better? Like, does it feel better to kiss my husband? Well, yeah, than to yell at him. Like, obviously it does. So it's a really interesting way of, like, okay, if what you're doing isn't working, what can you do that would work, right? So think about what's a positive way you could actually get someone in your life to start shifting their behavior so that it meets what you need them to do without, like, continuously just nagging and harassing and yelling. And it's really, really interesting when you think about that and you're like, huh, well, what do I have to lose, right? Like, that's what I'm thinking. Like, what do I have to lose? Like, if it's already not working, trying something different, what's the worst that can happen? It didn't work, right? And so then you can continue to experiment and see what happens. But really think about, how could I come from, again, a place of love, because essentially that's what that is, positive reinforcement, versus a place of negativity and fear and bad energy, because it's not working, right? Like, for most of us, somebody yelling at you to do something doesn't work. It doesn't work for our kids. It doesn't work for each other. So what's a different way you can look at this?
Well, and I think, yet again, when you're aware of the person's needs, the person's love languages, how they are receptive to this, right? Like, for some people, maybe kissing them is like, although if you're in a relationship, I hope it's on the higher list of your hierarchy of things that you would love to experience with your partner, but that's on you. But yet again, if they have a different love language that speaks to them, involving that, right? Like, maybe it is, giving them a gift or giving them whatever it may be, right? Like, of how they receive those things, of when they're in the mode of doing what it is that you've had the constant argument on, instead of beating a dead horse and just constantly yelling at each other and causing a fight and friction and, like, you don't appreciate me and everything else. Like, we can get into more of whether or not somebody can actually make you feel a certain way, right? Like, I think that's an important element for us to also understand, is nobody can make you feel a certain way, right? Like, I think that's really important for us to really understand, because it's like, well, no, you made me feel this way when you did X, Y, Z. No, you didn't. It's like, well, nothing has any meaning until we give it meaning, right? Like, it's the same thing we do with our feelings, our sensation, all these things that we do internally, but nothing has any meaning unless I give it meaning, right? And so oftentimes it's either we need to change the meaning, or we need to change our perception of what's going on in that moment, and understand that the sensations, all these things have nothing to do with it other than the label in which I give it.
Well, and I think too, just to expand on that, when you've done more of the self work and you've looked inward, you start to understand that like if someone's making you feel a certain way, you're in reactionary mode, right? And we always want to talk about, we come from a place of action and creation. And like, if you feel like someone can make you feel a certain way, really they're probably triggering you. But like, that just means more that you need to look inward and not outward, right? And that's what she talks about in this book a ton of like, and it's everything we've been talking about, is that if you want to have a better relationship, if you want to have, you know, more romance, any of those things, like go within and see where you can change and where you can shift and how you can grow, and then everything else will shift with it.
So with that being said, we're going to shift it over to the fellas of how do we kind of influence.
And this is totally opposite and very
this,
funny.
And this can go, and then, yet again, this isn't just like, well, women, you can only do this, men only do this. Like, this all goes all together. But I think the big part that we're trying to do with any of these things, you guys, is shift your focus, right? Like, where focus goes, energy flows, right? And so oftentimes it's just like nothing different within our kids, right? Like when kids fall down, what do you start doing before they start crying? You start cheering, right? Like, yay, that's so awesome, right? Like, everything's all good. All you're doing is shifting their focus. And all we're going to do with this method is the same thing, is shift our focus, right? And so oftentimes, yet again, I'm going to put this on there, but I'm not saying it's all women that just start nagging, complaining.
It's super stereotypical.
Yes,
but this was also a case study that had validity and research.
Yeah, so then they had a group of wives that were there that, you know, their husbands were
No, they had the husbands.
What's that?
They had the husbands.
Well, no, the women were the ones that were complaining.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So the husbands would complain. The husband kept it, where their feedback was that their wives continually complain about X, Y, Z. Right.
Well, and maybe not complain, but the wives were always in a negative. Like they would rehash this negative stuff all the time. Yeah. No matter what was happening, right? So part of the problem was that they weren't being present, but like they were like, my wife gets in this negative vibe and like she just keeps bringing it up and going there and going there and going there, and it's exhausting, right? So whether it was worry or what was going wrong or whatever, so the wife was in that negative, quote unquote, complaining energy, and the husbands were like, gosh, can you just please stop? Okay.
So when anyone tells you to stop doing what you're doing, especially if you're in a negative Nancy type of mood or you're complaining and everything else, what typically happens? It just kind of compounds the problem, and all of a sudden you're not listening to me, you don't care, and all the other stuff that starts to leak down. So her suggestion on this was, well, let's throw a curveball in there. Like, anytime you notice your significant other start to do these habits, you start taking your clothes off.
Okay, wait, hold on. So there's two parts you missed. So, sorry, I just listened to this morning. So, so they told the wives, right? And so they made a meeting where it was like a half an hour a week. They could go in and they'd sit down and they talk about all the worries, all the fears, all the stuff that was going on. So like the wife had the time. It wasn't like
they had their venting session to actually let energy, let all that stuff that was underneath move.
Exactly. So it wasn't like you just never got to talk about it. So they had that set thing, and then they told the wives, anytime you start doing this outside of that given set time, agreed upon time, your husband's going to start taking his clothes off. Right? So slowly, maybe first it's his tie or his hat or his socks or his belt. But if you keep complaining, no matter where you are, he's going to continue to take his clothes off until he ends up possibly naked in public. Right? So as a female, most of us probably don't want our husbands just standing around naked. I mean, not that he looks amazing, but I don't really want him. I don't want him naked in public. Right? And so for the women, it was this visceral, like it was this visual, like, oh, what am I doing, right? Like, because the husbands wouldn't say anything. They would just slowly start taking their clothes off. And so, like, what it would do, it was make the wife focus back into, like, oh, wow, what am I doing, right? Because I think a lot of times, like, I know people in my life that do this, that just sort of repeat that negative story all the time because they don't know any better and they don't know that they're doing it, right? And so bringing that awareness to, like, oh, I'm doing it again, right? And for the husbands, I'm sure it was just sort of like...
Well, the husbands thought it was a funny...
Right,
game with it.
And both of these, right? You guys, they're playful, they're easy, they're light, right? And so we were... I have one more thing to say, but anything else to say on this?
You kind of took it. So
sorry. Well, we were just on a walk and we were talking about this, and we do a lot of analyzing of our own relationship, but we've also both had really long-term relationships. And so I think what was interesting for me, and I just had this realization, was like, I kind of always thought I was happy, right? And so if you really think, like, big life goal is to be happy, right? Like, everything we chase, everything we search, everything we're doing externally really is just ultimately
is driven by love. We talked about it before.
Yeah, to be happy and loved. And so I said this to Brandon, I was like, I thought I was happy for a lot of times in my life, but I was like, I think I was adrenaline happy, right? Like I was happy from the hustle and the achievement, but I wasn't really like deep down actually soul, like calm. Like now I have a very calm, just like presence of happiness in my body. Whereas before it was like there had to be something to make me feel that way. There was still the external thing, which is like, I'm going to call it adrenaline happy, right? The achievement, the going, the doing. And like when you realize that you can only live on that for so long and you start to know the difference, right? Like I didn't know the difference. I didn't know, like if you knew me, it wasn't like, oh, Courtney's been depressed her whole life. She was so sad. Like I was happy most of my life, or so I thought, but there was so much deeper stuff that I really wasn't genuinely happy on that just like soul calm level. And that's what we want to teach you guys is like, what does that feel like? And if you don't have it, what can we start to shift in your life so that you can actually start to feel that?
Well, and I think I think it comes back to the stance of not needing external things to fulfill us, right? I think that's been a big marker for myself of just being able to bring about gratitude at any moment and throughout the day, right? Like I know for myself, for a long time, I had a very, very hard time. We talked about this before, but essentially saying I'm proud of myself, right? And it's like, well, if I can't be proud of myself, and I don't know what that feeling really feels like for myself, what's the likelihood that I'm going to be able to experience pride with her, pride with my kids, all these other elements, if I don't know what that feels like internally for myself, right? And so with all these things, you guys, is the more we grow and the more we expand and become from a different awareness for ourselves, right? Like that expands our world and our view for ourselves, and that also plays into the roles we play with our significant others and the other relationships we have around us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the happy thing is a big thing. Like I literally named my company the Happiness Endeavor because that's what I realized. It was like the whole time I was just chasing happiness and I didn't know it, and we were talking about that. We talked about fun yesterday and having more fun, and it's like fun and spontaneity and all that kind of relationships leads to more joy, which leads to more happiness, right? And I mean, I had this revelation when we were walking that literally the reason I ended up getting divorced from my first marriage was that because we didn't have any fun. I wasn't having any fun. And so like it actually took having fun to realize how unhappy I was to know that I actually needed to be happy, right? And so like ask yourself the question, in a relationship or not, like what things do you do that make you happy? What things you do in your life that are fun? And if you can't come up with like 5 or 10 things pretty quickly, you really need to look at that and go, okay, well, what if my job, let's just pretend my job is to be happy and to have fun. What things would I do every day that actually bring joy and light to my life? And if you start slowly doing those things, you're going to, again, we keep saying this, you're going to see these massive shifts. And if you start having more fun and you start being more fun, your relationships will grow and they will change.
Well, we talked about that with values, right? Like, I mean, happiness is a value. And it's just a simple question of what has to happen in order for you to have happiness in your life, right? And it's like, well, what has to happen for you to experience happiness with your partner, right? And if it's what we tend to do as human beings is we don't stack the deck in our favor, right? Like we put unrealistic expectations and rules and all these things that in order for us to have to experience or have to align with and experience or do or experience in order to receive that value in which we're trying to essentially feel, right? But I think the funny part is, and Courtney pointed this out, is we're the dealers, right? Like the part is we don't stack the deck in our favor and we're the dealers of the hands, right? And it's understanding that you have absolutely the control right now in this moment in time to create happiness, create joy, create love, create all these things, but it's coming from a place of what has to happen in order for you to experience that. And if your expectations, your rules, all the other things that aren't maybe what you're defining and putting upon these things isn't allowing you to do that the mass majority of the time, perhaps we need to expand on those things a little bit and maybe reevaluate of how this is going, because yet again, life doesn't have to be this like slam yourself into a wall. Life doesn't have to be like, well, we're married, this is just our life now, right? Like life doesn't have to be these ways, right? And so it's being able to dig deeper through the layers. It's being able to pull it back and understand a lot more about ourselves so you can actually enjoy your life instead of looking back at your life of like, well, shit, that one time when I was, back in the day, that was my glory day, right? Like you can experience that right now in this moment in time.
Yeah, so ask yourself, like, what do I do that makes me happy? What did I used to do that makes me happy, right? And, like, if you're in a place where you don't really have a ton of fun and you're not just sort of genuinely happy, go back and look at what it was and then start doing those things. Or think about what would make me happy? What could I do right now that would make me happy? But that takes an honest answer. And here's the thing, you guys, we talk about this all the time. We're going to say it again. It's that awareness first, right? First awareness and then non-judgment. And you can't say, well, God, I used to be fun. I used to love to do all these things, but it's just gone now, right? I can't do that again. Like, stop putting limitations on it and be honest with, like, what do you want? What do you need that makes you happy? And then after in that feeling, then you can craft the how, right? The how is always the last thing. It's the least important thing. And so say, like, what do I do that's making me happy? And if you're not doing anything, then think about, well, like, what would make me happy, right? Like, go online tomorrow, grab a meditation. I've got some if you want some on shifting, on happiness, on gratitude, and any of those things. But, like, just take 10 minutes and be with yourself. And if that scares you, I get it. Do it anyway, right? I'm sort of a meditation person, but, like, just take that time and breathe, right? I mean, we did a breath work on Saturday that literally was, I'm so happy and grateful, right? If you want the breath work, I'll send it to you. Like, whatever we can do to get you guys to help you guys look inward and say, okay, what do I need? Because when you fill up your cup, when you decide that you're ready to be happy, when you decide that you don't need something outside of you to make you happy, all the things that you're searching for, that you're chasing right now, they're already inside of you and they will come to you once you look inward, right?
Well, and that's what I was going to say on there is with that, it's being honest with yourself, but it's also making sure that your happiness isn't depending on something else out external from yourself, right? Like, well, I'll be happy once we're back to work and the life is back to normal and all these things. Well, okay, they keep pushing it back, right? Like we see that every day with people and everything else. Like, well, I'm just going to wait until this all flourishes over and then I'm going to get back to achieving the things that I want to achieve. Okay, well, what if that's 6 months from now, right? Like, what if that's 8 months from now? I'm not going to say that this is going to be forever because eventually this will come to pass just like anything else. But do you know when this is going to end? I don't know when it's going to end. Nobody else, I don't even think even the higher ups that are drawing the rules and regulations over this know when this is going to end, right? And so it's being able to be honest, take ownership, not coming from a place of judgment, but owning your scenario and understanding that you're in the scenario you are because you put yourself there. And at the same time, you are the one that is the architect that can also get yourself out of the scenario that you are in.
Yeah. So awareness, non-judgment, curiosity, acceptance, growth, right? That's how it goes. So we got a little off topic, but yeah, hopefully. So ladies, if you're going to try this with your husbands and not tell them, well, let me know. I want to hear about it in 3 weeks.
And husbands, if you get a lot of kisses, you can say thank you.
And guys, if you decide to do this with your wives, you do have to tell your wife that you're going to start getting naked.
But you
can't really go anywhere right now, so that might not be as effective. But it still might be effective. Like, maybe you don't want your husband naked in your living room floor when you have little kids, whatever. But anyway, we love you guys. We appreciate you. If you have questions, let us know. If you're going to do this, let us know. And we've hit 40 episodes, so that's exciting. We are going to start to turn these into a podcast. Not sure when, but hopefully soon. So appreciate you guys. Love you guys. Hope you're having a great Sunday. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, y'all.